All right, church, we are in our first Devo that revolves around the book of Ephesians. I'm so excited to be jumping into that with you all. I think Ephesians is going to be a major blessing for you. The sermon coming up this Sunday is from Ephesians chapter 1, verses 1 through 6. But today, specifically, I want to look at the points found in verses 4 and 5. Here's what it says. For he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, to be holy and blameless, in love before him. He predestined us to be adopted as sons through Jesus Christ for himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. What I wanted to share today is really based on a website that I'm familiar with called BethlehemStar.com. I want to really recommend that to you all, that you go and you read some of the details that you can find there in BethlehemStar.com. But what you'll find is in this study, you'll find on this website how they believe that the Magi were able to read in the stars the story of the coming of Christ, our Messiah. They were able to see kind of the story that was written in the stars long before anyone else could see it. And they began to travel, and these wise men came and found Christ as a result. It's a phenomenal story, and it talks about details, and it talks about science, and it talks about all that God was doing. It's phenomenal. Let me highly recommend it. But what I want you all to notice is that the stars wrote that story of the coming of Christ. What I want you to think about for a second is in the creation story. What we find in Genesis chapter 1 is this, that God did everything. It says, in the beginning, God, and he begins to lay things out. But then on the first day, light was created. On the second day, the sky was created. On the third day, dry land, seas, plants, and trees were created. On the fourth day, the sun, moon, and stars were created. On the fifth day, creatures that live in the sea and creatures that fly were created. And on the sixth day, animals that live on the land, and finally, humans that were made in the image of God were created. Day 7 is the day that it says God rested or took a break. And it's from that we get the idea of a Sabbath rest. Now you may be saying, John, what does this have to do with Ephesians? Here's what I want you to see, is that God put the stars in the sky on day 4 of creation. And that on day 6, animals, including humanity, who was made in the image of God, were created. What does that mean? It means that when the Magi saw in the stars that Christ was coming, that God had preordained that. He had already written that story up into the stars, into their orbits. He had already communicated that and written it out and made it in such a way where the Magi could see it and respond. And what I want you to see is that he wrote that story on day 4, and he made humans on day 6. Long before we sinned, long before we had fallen from grace, which we find in chapter 3 of Genesis, long before we made choices or made up our own decisions or really were worthy of hell, he had already made a way for us to be saved. And so when I look at Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4 and 5, it means the world to me. Listen again to what it says. For he chose us in him before the foundation of the world, to be holy and blameless, in love before him. He predestined us to be adopted as sons through Jesus Christ for himself, according to the good pleasure of his will. I'm so thankful for him. I'm so thankful for the way he moves. I'm so thankful that He had this planned out. And I want to live a life that is seen as grateful and oozes with gratitude and joy out of recognition of the grace that He's given me. I hope you have a fantastic day and live today in awe of His magnificence.